1. Zanclean Flood. Let's talk about one of the most apocalyptic events in the history of our planet. Around 5.3 million years ago, the entire Mediterranean basin was basically a colossal, dry desert. Picture a vast, blistering, miles-deep wasteland where ancient ecosystems thrived and early species or ancient societies of primitive mammals would have roamed. Then, catastrophic tectonic shifts and rising sea levels in the Atlantic Ocean conspired to shatter the land bridge at the Strait of Gibraltar. The barrier broke. The ocean poured in. This catastrophic natural event completely wiped out the ancient life settled in this massive valley. To understand the sheer size of this, think of a typical green garden hose. You know, the kind you leave running to fill a small plastic kiddie pool in your backyard. Now, magically scale that garden hose up until its nozzle is over a mile wide. Imagine it blasting highly pressurized ocean water across an entire continent. That is the Zanclean Flood. As the Atlantic surged through the breach, it did not look like beautiful blue ocean water. It was a terrifying, chaotic sludge. You would see a churning, roaring soup of frothing white water. You would notice ripped-up brown earth and pulverized gray rocks creating thick, muddy textures that painted the landscape in the colors of pure destruction. You would see jagged limestone chunks suspended in a thick, almost syrupy wall of dark debris. The real power is the sheer vertical drop. You would think water would just spread out slowly, but thanks to a vertical drop of over a kilometer from the Atlantic down into the basin, gravity took total control. The water achieved terminal velocity, accelerating down this mega ramp at highway speeds, carving out a canyon hundreds of meters deep in mere days. Its endurance was infinite because it had an entire ocean feeding it from behind. At first glance, if you tone it down, you might compare this event to getting pushed over by a gentle, rolling wave at the beach. It feels mild, just a tiny shove from the water. But the terrifying reality for humans and the environment is paralyzing. When a surge this size hits you, it crushes the air out of your lungs instantly under millions of tons of pressure. Here is exactly how it inflicts its damage. The roaring surge would aggressively chase down anything trying to sprint away. It would relentlessly attack the dry cliffs, undercutting them until millions of tons of rock collapsed. The floodwaters would ambush the deep, twisting valleys, surging up from below to swallow entire ancient forests. The water seemed to intentionally wait for the valleys to fill completely before violently spilling over the ridges to spot new prey in the adjacent basins. Nature endured a relentless, deafening bombardment of boulders and sludge that scoured the earth down to the bedrock. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. This single flood completely filled the Mediterranean Sea in a matter of months, raising the water level by over 30 feet every single day. If you think filling a sea is wild, wait until you see what happens when a glacier decides to let go. 2. Missoula floods. Let's talk about the incredible ice dams that shattered and completely drowned the American Pacific Northwest. During the last ice age, an enormous glacial lake in Montana was held back by a fragile, towering wall of ice. Suddenly, the ice ruptured. It unleashed a catastrophic natural event that repeatedly wiped out ancient societies of native wildlife and prehistoric human ancestors living in the surrounding valleys. To visualize the immense size of this disaster, picture a heavy metal snowplow clearing your driveway in the winter. Now, imagine that exact same snowplow blown up to the size of a modern skyscraper. Imagine it scraping thousands of miles of solid bedrock completely clean in a matter of hours. The appearance was absolutely shocking. It wasn't clear, sparkling water. It was a dense, concrete-like slurry of crushed gray ice. It featured deep black mud and violently swirling white foam. The churning textures looked exactly like a liquid mountain range tearing through the flat plains. Surprisingly, the power is its repetitive nature. This megaflood did not just happen once and fade away into history. The ice dam would reform, fill up, and explode dozens of times over thousands of years. The brutal endurance of this cycle completely reshaped the continent. To tone it down, you might compare its effects to slipping on a wet kitchen floor after dropping a glass of water. It seems like a simple, harmless loss of footing. But in reality, this icy flood hits with the unstoppable force of a million speeding freight trains. The crushing wave would aggressively chase massive herds of mammoths across the plains. It would brutally attack the basalt cliffs, stripping away millions of years of solid rock in mere minutes. The icy waters would ambush dormant riverbeds, flooding them so incredibly fast that nothing could possibly escape. The freezing waters would violently wait behind temporary gorges until the pressure peaked. Then they exploded forward to spot everything in their path. Nature endured a complete, violent reshaping of the earth itself. Whole canyons were carved overnight. The ground was literally stripped naked. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. The flood left giant ripple marks on the ground just like the tiny ones you see at the beach, except these ripples are 50 feet high and can only be fully appreciated from space. As destructive as these repetitive ice bombs were, the next disaster shows how a rising ocean can slowly swallow a whole world. 3. Black Sea Deluge. Let's talk about the creeping saltwater monster that swallowed a massive freshwater haven. Around 7,000 years ago, the Black Sea was just a large, isolated freshwater lake completely surrounded by fertile farmlands. It was a thriving, vibrant paradise. Catastrophic natural events involving rapidly melting glaciers raised the global ocean levels. The Mediterranean Sea swelled relentlessly until it finally breached the Bosporus Strait. This unleashed a toxic saltwater flood that completely wiped out ancient societies of early farmers who had built their entire lives on the lake's shores. To grasp the size of this event, do not picture a vast ocean. Think of an everyday porcelain bathtub that you forgot to turn off. Now imagine that porcelain bathtub is the size of the entire European continent, violently overflowing and spilling out an unstoppable sheet of water across your entire bathroom floor. The water surging through the strait was incredibly thick, dark, and bubbling. You would see terrifying jet-black mud dragged up from the ocean floor. You would notice sickening shades of olive green as marine algae violently mixed with the pristine fresh water. The real power is the unrelenting, silent pressure of rising water. It didn't strike in one single, crashing wave. It poured continuously for 300 days, raising the water level by over 6 inches every single day. The sheer endurance of this flood meant absolutely no one could outrun it for long. If you want to tone it down, you could compare its effects to standing under a cold, running shower in your bathroom. It feels completely harmless. Just cold water splashing gently on your head. But the horrifying reality of this event is absolute environmental destruction. The cold, heavy salt water sank straight to the bottom of the lake, instantly suffocating all marine life. The rising floodwaters would aggressively chase the fleeing villagers up the steep hillsides. The toxic brine would brutally ambush the freshwater fish, killing them on contact. The heavy saltwater would systematically attack the fertile soil, turning lush green farms into barren, lifeless wastelands. The rising sea seemed to silently wait in the lowlands. It would patiently rise to spot new human settlements frantically clinging to the mountain ridges. Nature and humans endured a painfully slow, agonizing drowning of their entire world. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. Because the incredibly heavy salt water settled at the bottom completely without oxygen, this flood perfectly preserved the ancient wooden shipwrecks that sank there, keeping them perfectly intact thousands of years later. As terrifying as a slow drowning is, the next disaster literally changed the global temperature. For Lake Agassiz outburst. Let's talk about the colossal freshwater bomb that actually managed to freeze the entire planet. At the end of the last ice age, an ocean-sized freshwater lake sat perfectly still in the middle of North America, held back by massive, crumbling continental ice sheets. When those towering ice walls finally collapsed, the catastrophic natural event sent thousands of cubic miles of freezing water rushing straight into the ocean. This sudden release completely wiped out ancient societies of Ice Age hunters who had thrived on the frozen tundra. To understand the sheer size of this release, picture a simple, red rubber water balloon bursting in your hands on a hot summer day. Now, strategically scale that bursting water balloon up until it covers the entirety of Canada. Imagine that mega balloon popping and releasing all its freezing contents in one single, terrifying roar. The appearance was a chaotic nightmare of pristine destruction. You would see blindingly white chunks of glacial ice the size of massive modern cities. You would notice deep, freezing sapphire blue water churning violently with gray, pulverized bedrock. Surprisingly, the power is its invisible, long-lasting grip on global ocean currents. It unleashed more water than all the modern rivers in the world combined, and it completely stopped the warm ocean circulation dead in its tracks. If you want to tone it down, compare its effects to opening your kitchen freezer door in the summer and feeling a mild, cold breeze gently hit your face. It feels refreshing and totally safe. But the terrifying reality is that this invisible cold blast completely suffocated the Earth. The freezing floodwaters would ruthlessly chase the mammoth herds across the broken plains. The massive ice chunks would aggressively ambush anything swimming in the massive flooded rivers. The freezing surge would violently attack the ancient coastline, shattering the landscape completely. The frigid water would silently wait in the deep ocean basins. It would relentlessly spread outward to spot the warm ocean currents and destroy them entirely. Humans and nature endured a sudden, brutal plunge back into the darkest depths of the Ice Age. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. This single burst of freshwater lowered global temperatures so violently that it triggered a mini ice age lasting over 1,000 years. Now, pay close attention, because I am announcing the secret question to be revealed at the end of the video. Only those who watch the entire video will know the answer. The first correct comment will be featured in the next video. Congratulate the winner of the previous video, winner's name here. The next disaster proves that even the shallowest waters can hide the deadliest secrets. 5. Persian Gulf Flood. Let's talk about the hidden catastrophe that drowned an actual earthly paradise. Before the end of the last ice age, the Persian Gulf was not a massive body of water at all. It was a massive, lush, green river valley. This fertile basin was the ultimate cradle of early life. Then, melting glaciers caused the massive Indian Ocean to rise relentlessly. The catastrophic natural events slowly breached the narrow, rocky Strait of Hormuz. The swelling ocean completely wiped out ancient societies of advanced foragers who had built a thriving, beautiful civilization in this sanctuary. To visualize the incredible size, think of a creeping coffee spill slowly expanding across your entire office desk. Now, imagine that dark coffee spill is the size of an entire country, inevitably soaking up every single piece of dry land in its path. The water did not rush in with a dramatic, loud crash. It looked like a creeping, murky brown stain on the horizon. You would see thick, olive-colored swamp water mixing violently with the crystal-clear ocean tide. The real power is its absolute, creeping stealth. It did not need a giant, towering wave to destroy a civilization. It simply took away the land, inch by agonizing inch, day after day. If you tone it down, compare its effects to stepping into a tiny, lukewarm puddle on your bathroom floor in your socks. It is mildly annoying. Maybe a little uncomfortable. Completely harmless. The terrifying reality, however, is that this puddle never, ever stops growing. The creeping waters would silently chase the terrified villagers completely out of their ancestral homes. The rising tide would stealthily ambush the sleeping settlements in the dead of night. The ocean would aggressively attack the freshwater springs, poisoning them instantly with heavy salt. The sea seemed to wait patiently at the edges of the desperate human camps. It slowly expanded to spot any remaining dry land to mercilessly conquer. Humans endured a slow, agonizing eviction from their paradise, forced to watch their entire world disappear forever under the waves. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. Many prominent historians believe this exact flood actually created the myth of the Garden of Eden, drowning a lush, inhabited paradise that humanity has been desperately searching for ever since. If you think a slow flood is torturous, just wait until you see what happens when the sea physically severs a country in half. 6. Doggerland Tsunami. Let's talk about the apocalyptic wave that literally severed Britain from the rest of Europe forever. Thousands of years ago, a massive stretch of highly habitable land called Doggerland connected the British Isles to the continent. It was a thriving, bustling landscape of marshes and thick forests. Then, a massive underwater landslide off the distant coast of Norway triggered a catastrophic natural event. A monstrous tsunami raced violently across the shallow North Sea. It completely wiped out ancient societies of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who were completely unaware of the approaching doom. To understand the sheer size of this devastating wave, think of a solid brick wall standing in your neighborhood. Now, imagine that heavy brick wall is moving at jet speed and stretches entirely across the entire visible horizon. The appearance of this wave was pure, terrifying chaos. You would not see a clear, beautiful surfing wave. You would see a colossal, churning wall of black mud, tangled green trees, and frothing gray seawater. The real power is the sheer kinetic energy magically transferred through the shallow sea. Because the water was so incredibly shallow, the monstrous wave grew exponentially taller and more violently compressed as it approached the land. If you tone it down, you could easily compare its effects to getting splashed on your ankles by a passing car driving through a puddle. It is a minor inconvenience that barely even moves you. But the terrifying reality of this massive tsunami is that it acts exactly like a giant, relentless wrecking ball. The black water would brutally chase down the terrified hunters frantically sprinting through the marsh. The colossal wave would instantly ambush the low-lying camps, offering absolutely no high ground for escape. The surging, heavy debris would aggressively attack the ancient forests, snapping massive oak trees like tiny, dry twigs. The flood waters would violently wait in the flooded valleys. They swirled violently to spot any desperate survivors clinging to the wreckage. Nature and humanity endured a brutal, instantaneous deletion of their entire vibrant habitat. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. Ancient humans were literally walking on foot between Europe and England just moments before this single wave permanently severed the connection and turned Britain into an isolated island. As shocking as a massive tsunami in the North Sea is, the actual trigger behind it was even more terrifying. 7. Storegga Slide. Let's talk about the invisible underwater collapse that physically displaced an entire ocean. Around 8,200 years ago, an unimaginable amount of sediment sat extremely precariously on the edge of the Norwegian continental shelf. Suddenly, an area of the seafloor the size of Iceland completely gave way. This catastrophic natural event sent hundreds of cubic miles of thick mud sliding rapidly into the deep abyss. This underwater avalanche completely wiped out ancient societies living peacefully on the coastlines for thousands of miles. To successfully picture the size, imagine dropping a standard, heavy bowling ball into a muddy puddle in your front yard. Now, magically imagine that heavy bowling ball is the size of a massive country, plunging miles deep into the ocean crust. The appearance of the slide itself was completely hidden underwater, but the surface became a boiling nightmare. You would see the deep blue ocean suddenly erupt into violent, churning patches of sickening brown mud. The water violently boiled with thick white foam and rapidly escaping gas bubbles. Surprisingly, the power is its complete lack of warning. There was absolutely no massive earthquake that people could feel on the land. The shelf just silently disintegrated. If you want to tone it down, compare its effects to the gentle rocking motion you feel when you sit down on a standard waterbed. It feels incredibly soft, bouncing and completely harmless. But the horrifying reality is that this silent displacement physically displaced enough water to violently drown entire coastlines in minutes. The displaced ocean would viciously chase the coastal birds far inland. The completely silent tsunami would absolutely ambush the fishing villages from an eerily calm sea. The massive displacement would aggressively attack the rocky fjords, aggressively funneling the water into unstoppable, crushing jets. The angry ocean seemed to wait in the deep, dark trenches. It gathered unimaginable energy to spot the most vulnerable human settlements on the shore. Humans endured a sudden, roaring wall of death that came from absolutely nowhere. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. The actual trigger for this apocalyptic collapse wasn't a tectonic earthquake at all, but rather prehistoric methane gas bubbles completely popping in the mud, turning the solid ocean floor into a highly slippery liquid. As massive as this underwater collapse was, our final journey brings us back to the cradle of civilization for one last devastating deluge. 8. Mediterranean Flood. Let's talk about the cataclysmic flooding events that repeatedly ravaged the ancient Mediterranean coastlines immediately after massive volcanic collapses. Long after the basin originally filled, the Mediterranean was still a volatile, incredibly dangerous place. Around 8,000 years ago, a massive chunk of Mount Etna collapsed directly into the Dark Sea. This catastrophic natural event immediately generated a monstrous megatsunami that swept violently across the entire basin. It violently wiped out ancient societies of Neolithic farmers who had happily built early coastal villages. To truly grasp the size of this wave, think of an overflowing kitchen sink gently splashing water onto your countertops. Now, magically imagine that overflowing sink is a cascading waterfall the size of the Empire State Building, crashing horizontally across the sea. The appearance of this disaster was a horrifying, apocalyptic mix of volcanic ash and dark seawater. You would see an enormous, charcoal-gray wall of water rapidly approaching. You would notice chunks of black pumice stone and searing hot debris violently mixing with the foaming whitecaps. The real power is its incredible, uninterrupted speed. Because the Mediterranean is a deep, highly enclosed basin, the wave traveled at the blistering speed of a commercial airliner, violently bouncing off the coastlines. If you gently tone it down, compare its effects to a fast-moving tide coming in while you are building a tiny sandcastle. It seems like a playful, gentle wash of water over your feet. But the agonizing reality is that this wave acts exactly like a colossal bulldozer. The towering wall of water would ruthlessly chase the villagers desperately fleeing toward the hills. The massive surge would instantly ambush the narrow coastal inlets, violently multiplying in height and fury. The debris-filled water would aggressively attack the stone dwellings, completely pulverizing them into fine dust. The floodwaters would violently wait in the ruined harbors. They churned endlessly to spot anything left breathing in the water. Nature and humanity endured a chaotic, fiery drowning as volcanic rock and seawater destroyed absolutely everything. Here is a bizarre fact that completely turns everything upside down. The incredibly fast wave traveled so incredibly fast that it simultaneously hit shores on 3 entirely different continents before anyone could even scream. We have reached the end of our journey exploring every prehistoric mega flood that could kill you. The secret question is, which flood was triggered by popping prehistoric methane gas bubbles in the mud? Leave your answers in the comments section. Thank you for exploring with me. Stay curious and watch your step.